Hello and welcome to Titsky Sour. Sorry we are late this evening. We assume it's because the royal media operation understood that Ash Sarkar was going to tell some truths about what happened in that tunnel in Paris in 1997. But you know, we've got around it. We've got the best tech team around, and we are live speaking to you directly from Bermondsey. On tonight, we are going to discuss the two great divorces of our age, of which we can ask many of the same questions. Were they driven by racism? What will happen in the transition period? And will the separations be hard with few ties remaining, or soft with most shares commitments remaining intact? I'm of course talking about Brexit, the separation of the UK from the European Union, and the separation of Prince Harry and his wife Meghan, or Megxit. To discuss these, I'm joined by two experts in these respective fields. Anand Menon, who is director of the UK in a Changing Europe, and Ash Sarkar, who I discovered this morning is actually an expert on the royal family, right?
I now wish to be introduced as Novara Media's royal correspondent.
I like that. We can go with that.
Because I've watched all 3 seasons of The Crown, so that's what constitutes my expertise.
You and the rest of the population.
I'm going to leave a lot of the Megxit chat to you, just because I know that, you know, I get a bit out of depth when you talk about it. But
Megxit monologue.
I mean, the basics is last week Meghan and Harry announced they would be resigning their roles as senior members of the royal family. They're going to split their time between the UK and North America, I think mainly Canada, but also a bit LA. And they're going to try and become financially independent, which means they won't be funded by the British taxpayer, I presume. I don't know if they'll still be, you know, receiving money from the royal estate, which we should consider our own, really. And they've blamed, in large part, the British media, the British tabloid press especially, who have really harassed Meghan since she first married Harry, or I suppose since they first discovered who she was. Ash, are you going to give us the lowdown?
Okay, well, I have a lot of very, very strong feelings about this, and it's not actually motivated by particularly strong feelings about Meghan Markle as an individual or about any sense of affection for the royal family. What I feel about this whole situation is generated by the media discussion around it and Britain's inability to have an honest conversation about racism. I think that in lots of ways we're far behind even America in being able to acknowledge the depth and power of racism in shaping our institutions, our culture, and our everyday lives in this country. And then the other part of it is the sort of, you know, yes, I'm fascinated by the royal family because it's so weird, because they're all so damn weird, and we have this collective delusion and attachment that the Queen is somehow the nation's grandmother and not the latest in a long line of imperialists and Nazi sympathizers and, you know, emotionally dysfunctional poshos. So I'm quite interested in the sort of cultural and mental gymnastics that go into us creating a place for the royal family at the centre of our culture. And I think that Meghan Markle, on both these issues, British racism and the weirdness of the royal family, sheds a particularly strong light. If I could direct your attention, gentlemen of the jury, to Exhibit A, which is Meghan's interview earlier last year with Tom Bradby of ITV News, the documentary that was made about her and Harry doing some stuff in Africa. I don't know what they were doing, going around being nice, and people were grateful that there were royals and that kind of thing. And most shockingly, Prince Harry was like, the press killed my mother. Although it was a bit of a like one of those like slippy theys where it's like, they killed my mother. It's like, you're talking about the press or are you talking about your grandma? And Meghan Markle talked about the struggles of adjusting to life as a royal. And basically she's like, no one has ever asked if I'm okay. Like, no one has ever asked if I'm okay. So there's a general expectation of once you're in what Princess Diana, R.I.P., called the firm, is that the firm will protect you from the worst of the media, because the royal family in this country still have a huge amount of power when it comes to the media. They're quite good at shutting down stories. If you want evidence of just how good they are, ask yourselves how aware you are of the Prince William cheating rumours. If you're not that aware, it means that the royals have been very good at doing their job of media management. However, with Meghan Markle, she has been subject to some of the most bizarre scrutiny I've ever seen. And if you do a one-for-one comparison of headlines that she has faced compared to Kate Middleton for doing the exact same thing, it's nuts. So take an issue like eating an avocado. Not really controversial. Kate Middleton eats an avocado during her pregnancy, apparently to reduce morning sickness, and it's a sign of Prince William being charming and accommodating and, considerate of his wife going through the, tumult of pregnancy. Meghan Markle eats an avocado, and there's a full-page spread about whether her favourite snack is funding terrorism and violence. Another example would be Meghan Markle, when pregnant, putting hands on her bump. I've never been pregnant, but I'm sure it's similar feeling to eating like a big burrito. So you just sort of rest your hands there, going
Don't know
like,
what she's asking you. but-
I'd hold the bump.
I'd hold the bump.
Yeah.
The burrito bump. And then she was accused of being virtue signalling or showing off. Kate Middleton, presented as a glowing image of a mother-to-be, etc., etc. So, these are clear examples of double standards. And the reason why this illustrates, in my view, the way polite British racism works is that it's plausibly deniable. So, in the last couple of days, you've seen Piers Morgan or Philip Schofield saying, I can't think of any one thing that's been racist. Well, it's because it's not any one thing. It's the cumulative effect of unfair standards, of unfair scrutiny, and a drip feed project of demonization, of being presented as duplicitous, dangerous, devious, and somehow unworthy of the place in society that you've managed to attain. And that's why I think so many people, in particular people of colour, and in particular younger people of colour, use Meghan Markle as an avatar for talking about racism that they experience, because it's not the big stuff. It's not stop and search. It's not incarceration. It's certainly not, access to jobs or your ability to rent a flat. But it does shed a light on that feeling of I'm doing twice as much for half as much. I'm having to jump through these hoops, and yet I'm never going to be seen as fully human. The sense that you are occupying a space in a parallel but overlapping universe, which is slightly off kilter and just that bit different from the kind of social space that your white friends inhabit. And I think that explains lots of the viciousness in this debate and why a lot of white people deny it so strenuously.
I mean, there are two things about the race thing, aren't there, I suppose. The first is that subtext of you should be grateful, which I get a lot, what this country has done. As if somehow, you should be more grateful than someone else, whether you were born here and contributed here or whatever. And the other, there's an American word that I saw a debate on Twitter about this. It was fascinating. That sums up the media attitude towards Meghan Markle, and it's uppity. That sort of sense.
That's what they call her, right? So
Yeah.
they're like, she's just so uppity and up
Well,
herself.
they don't even necessarily use that word, because I think it was very much a word used in the US context for sort of African Americans, sort of going above their station or wanting more than they actually should have had. And there's a real stench of that about. I mean, I can't match Ash for being either that interested or that passionate about the royal family. Hand on heart, I don't think about them very much. I think there are perfectly good reasons not to like the idea of a royal family, even if they were all perfectly functional human beings. Actually, I think the sort of structural reasons behind it for me are the killers. I'm no great fan of the institution. I can't get that worked up about it, but actually it just seems to me so apparent that the way Meghan Markle is talked about is clouded by her colour in so many different ways, and they're all pernicious and they're all negative.
I think we can get up a clip. This is an example of someone talking about Meghan Markle in the ways we've all been talking about. This is Eamon Holmes on Talk Radio from a couple of days ago. It's widely shared on Twitter.
How easy is it to be unroyal? How easy is it to walk away when you're as famous as they are? You can say we're not part of the royal family, but you still are, really. Because your family is your family, isn't it?
I agree with you, especially in America, where they'll all love this, and they'll be gormlessly looking at her, and she's playing the role of her life. I just find her incredibly irritating.
I've never met her, so I don't know.
But no, I've never met her either. But I look at her and I don't think I'd like you in real life. You're just that awful, woke, weak, manipulative, spoilt. What I have met is lots of people in TV series and movie stars and whatever from America who are mollycoddled beyond belief with PR people around them. and maybe she's just somewhat spoilt. They may well both be somewhat damaged, but she's a manipulator. She's a controller.
So you've got this plausible deniability of like, oh, of course it doesn't have anything to do with her race because she's an American Hollywood star, and I've met plenty of those. But awful woke, right? The word woke is doing so much work there in terms of being lifted from African-American vernacular English and then being used to denigrate anything which is knocking on the door of socially conscious. Weak, manipulative, spoiled. Manipulative. This idea that Prince Harry, whose mother was killed after being chased by paparazzi, whose father's well-known infidelity resulted in mental health issues for his mother, can't have any reason on his own grounds to mistrust either the media or indeed the royal family as an institution. It has to be the fault of this manipulative, devious woman of colour. And so I think that's the flip side of these, insane expectations that we have of women who marry into the royal family, of being, hyper feminine, of being dutiful, of being gloriously sunny, of being maternal but also beautiful and young, is that if you have this thing about you which sets you a little bit apart, the lexicon of female characteristics which are negative, so manipulative, spoiled, that's going to come at you, faster than the wall of a Paris tunnel.
I mean, I thought the bit that was most telling, or the bit that struck out to me, was him saying, I just look at her and I think all of this. Like he did this sort of post-facto rationalization. Oh yeah, I know people who've been on TV sets, but the bit that sounded really like he meant it was, I look at her and I think all of these things.
I'm just slightly in awe of the ability of someone to do a character assassination that's quite psychological of someone they've never even met and know very little about. I mean, it's just staggeringly stupid.
We talked about, I suppose, some of the subtle racism in British society that this has brought to the fore, but there's some more explicit racism in the history of the royal family, eh?
I think I do want to make one more really brief point about the subtle racism that's in British society, because actually,
or not so subtle. Sorry, that's to potentially underplay.
No, but like the subtle stuff, because there's loads of stuff which I don't know if you found this. I had to get like a white person to point out to me was going on. So little things like being in an offie once, and my best mate came up and whispered behind me, and she was like, did you ever notice that white people just walk into you as if you're not there? And I was like, babe, it's London, everyone does that, happens to everyone, and she was like, not like that, not to me. And then the minute she said it, I was like, wait a minute, this isn't happening to everyone else, this is happening to me in this really specific way. Or the first few dates I went on with my partner, he was like, it's really strange being in restaurants and waitresses who would normally fall over themselves to be nice to me are just being really awful to you. And I was like, oh, I didn't realize that it was different. I didn't realize that it was different for other people.
Well, I think I'd say two things. I'm going to tell you an off-license story in a minute from the 1970s. But the first thing is, I remember I lived in New York for a year and nothing explicit at all happened. But I was very conscious of the fact that whilst for large parts of my life in this country, people would look at me and think I was a bus driver or a taxi driver. In New York, people looked at me and thought I was a brain surgeon. And no one said anything, but it was just absolutely apparent in the way strangers dealt with me. Nothing had to be said at all, but it was a real eye-opener for me that the sort of priors that people bring to just looking at you are really important. Speaking of which, just when I was sort of finishing school, I got a job one Christmas at an off-license in Wakefield. And around Christmas, Wakefield was basically just a drunk fest with gangs around the streets pissed out of their heads. And the manager said to me, I want you to go outside, I want you to lock the door, and I want you to not let gangs of yobs who are pissed into the shop. I thought, oh, great job. So anyway, I was doing this, absolutely wetting myself.
But you were outside the shop?
Yeah. So that was bad. This gets worse, right?
So lock yourself out.
Yeah. To keep, you can be our sort of bouncer, whatever. But after about 10 minutes of this, I thought, right, I'm going to go back in and say it looks all fine. I turned around, the keys were gone from the door, and I thought, oh my God, I'm going to lose my job. So I sort of went back, I sort of knocked on the door, they let me in, and I said, look, I'm really, really sorry. And they all just burst out laughing. And it turned out that the butcher next door had seen me outside with the keys, had taken the keys, gone inside and said, there's a packy outside trying to nick your keys. So that's Wakefield's circa, 1982. So I do take your point about sort of subtle and covert racism, and I think it matters, and I think it should be addressed. But there is a bit of me, and maybe I'm slightly ashamed of this bit, that thinks actually, thank God that the overt stuff is far better than it used to be.
I mean, the thing is I think about this a lot because I've also experienced, by virtue of the climate in this country changing, and then also during the time at which this country's been going through the sort of lurch to the nativist right, also having an increase in profile, is that the rarity of being called something like Packy or being told on a daily basis to go home is that, well, that is now a daily part of my experience, both online and has happened occasionally in real life too. And I think what's concerns me about the way in which we separate these two things is that then the existence of the slur, whether it's Packy or it's the N-word or anything else, becomes almost like the stamp of authentication for acknowledging something as racism.
And they are linked. I'm not denying that. I'm not proud of myself. Actually, I find that the sort of abuse on the streets goes up when there's a World Cup.
Really?
Yeah. Sort of systematically, I found that. That people are more...
Even now?
Not the last couple of World Cups, but I used to sort of keep a track of them, actually, the number of times it would happen in the streets. And it was like, I remember England played Tunisia, this was years ago in a World Cup, and going back from work and someone shouting Packy at me, and I was thinking, blimey, what brought that on? And I sort of got home and twigged. It's quite interesting.
I think my weirdest, it was from a flatmate. So I'd moved into this really shitty flat in southeast London. One of the flatmates was an old mate from sixth form who was Nigerian. Then the other one was this boy who'd just moved from Colchester, and me and him didn't have loads in common, but we both liked football, so we'd go to the pub together and that kind of thing. And I was like, he's kind of laddie, kind of friendly, whatever. And he kept making jokes which betrayed his discomfort of being the only white boy in the flats. Sort of talking about I'm the real ethnic minority here. And that was also coupled with moving to London from Colchester and blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, he'll get over it. And then one night I got back from, I used to work in a pub. So I got back at must have been 1 a.m. or something. And he was like, stay up and have a drink with me. I was like, yeah, sure, have a beer. And then he was just looked at me and he was like, sometimes I look at you and I just think, you should be working in a call centre because of your complexion. And I was like, what? And I was like, what? And he was like, oh, no. And he backed off and I was like, whatever, I'll just finish this beer. Then a bit later on, he was like, sometimes I look at you and I just think your skin looks like the colour of shit in a toilet. And I was like, it's okay, now it's time for me to go to bed. So I just moved out the next month. I was like, I'm not entertaining this any further. And the thing is that this stuff just it comes from somewhere. And it's not necessarily the parents using this kind of language. It comes from absorbing by osmosis a narrative which tells you that people, for one, of South Asian descent, are weak, are subservient, and will take whatever abuse or denigration or condescension that you'll throw at them. They're the easy ones to bully, right? That they're not going to speak up or speak back. And then the other is that the fundamental dehumanization of people of color, and in particular the way in which people of African descent definitely get it, in terms of this parallel universe that I was talking about. When I was out with two of my friends who are black, someone came up to them and just you write Beyonce's, just out of nowhere, and I was like, does that happen to you often? They were like, yeah, whenever there's more than one of us out, suddenly you're hyper visible and people will just come up to you.
Though actually, I have to say, if you want to hear monkey noises en masse made against black sports people, you go to a cricket match in India against the West Indies.
Yeah, there's a ton of anti-blackness.
Yeah.
Ton of anti-blackness. I mean, anyway, we should probably move on from this, but
that is an important point, though, isn't it? Because I suppose one of the big talking points from the big right-wing white men on TV is why are people complaining it's more racist elsewhere, or it used to be more racist, we've improved. And then it's just are you really going to set the bar that low? That people should accept racism because there are other places that are more racist.
It's far messier than that, isn't it? Yes, there are aggregate numbers out there about people's attitudes towards immigration, and they've gone in a certain direction. But that doesn't mean that it's not the case that some other people feel far more free now to express unsavoury opinions. I mean, the two can exist together. It's not either or.
But also the one thing which I really disagree with is this idea that racists are stupid and that they're fundamentally unintelligent, and that when you're given a poll which goes, would you have a problem if your daughter married a black man, you're too stupid to go, oh, actually, this is sort of a disapproved of opinion, so maybe I might lie, or maybe I won't be completely, I won't try and sort of cushion my opinion or anything like that. Whereas no, I think like there is a sort of dominant sense of like it is bad to judge people for the colour of their skin. And most racists will tell you that it's bad to judge people for the colour of their skin. But when it comes to the real lived embedded social experience, all those attitudes are still there. So that's why I think polling is deceptive.
But I think it's very, very, to be honest, I think it'd be very, very hard indeed to get to the bottom of something as subtle as that through big surveys.
I mean, you would have to do one of those sort of mad 7-year studies where you like speak to someone every week about.
Yeah, or just do really sort of detailed. I mean, the problem with doing focus groups is, like you said, I mean, if there's a sort of social respectability about certain views that you might hold, then you might back off from saying. I mean, it's very hard to do.
The thing that you can. So when I was saying that, the big guy saying racism's reduced, so you shouldn't complain about it. I wasn't talking about those polls that show since Brexit, concern in opinion polls has said that racism has decreased. It's that in the 70s and 80s you had a lot more of a violent racism.
But it
and
happens.
Now
I mean, I read a piece in the papers over the weekend that basically elided the fact that obviously the press treatment of Meghan Markle isn't racist, with the fact that you have all these surveys showing that we've become more liberal in immigration. And, there's not a logical link between the two.
Things. Yeah. You want to do the avert racism, the royals?
Oh yeah, like this is my one last thing, because like I too don't think that the institution of the monarchy should exist, and that's for political reasons, fundamentally for me about the way in which our constitution is structured or not structured, for to put it in a better way. But I also have a least favourite minor royal. My least favourite minor royal. I mean, I don't like any of them, but this is my most loathed minor royal, Princess Michael of Kent. Real ones know about Princess Michael of Kent. Princess Michael of Kent, when meeting Meghan Markle, I think perhaps for the first time at a Christmas lunch, decided to wear a particular brooch. I can show you a picture off my laptop because hopefully it should be up on the screen.
Yeah, it'll be up.
It'll be there. It was this one, so just so you can have a look. It is a blackamoor brooch. These were made and were very popular between the 16th and 18th centuries. And some people have thought, oh, well, maybe she shouldn't really think about it that much. Princess Michael of Kent is the daughter of an SS officer who, at a restaurant in New York, told a table of black diners to go back to the colonies, and according to one book, owned 2 black sheep named Venus and Serena. So for her first meeting with her nephew's, mixed race fiance, decided to wear a blackamoor brooch. Do you know how racist you have to be be able to accessorize racistly? Like, just think about the levels of racism.
But that being said, I mean, that's hideous and awful. I mean, you can't, if you're going to do a moral sort of ranking of the royal family, Prince Andrew's got to be up top, hasn't he, at the moment? I mean,
very true.
Regardless, almost of what anyone. I mean,
Well, it's only Meghan that's caused the crisis in the royal family. Andrew,
that's one of the interesting things, isn't it? Some people seem to be more offended by Meghan Markle than they are by Prince Andrew, and I find that troubling.
Well, there's a thing with sort of like the Sun journalists, and I used to do radio with Dan Wootton, who's one of their executive editors.
Oh, yeah.
And they always have as their talking points, the thing we really hate is hypocrisy. We don't really mind paedophilia. We don't really mind, people who are racist or sexist or abuse, multiple women. What we care about is if someone talks about climate change and then takes a plane. Because that, that's the thing that drives them crazy. Potentially, if Prince Andrew had once...
John Major talking about family values. Then
yeah, potentially if Prince Andrew had once given a talk saying you shouldn't abuse underage girls, then they would have taken...
But he did. You want to talk about hypocrisy? See, look, royal facts.
She reads about this in her spare time.
He was a patron of the NSPCC.
Oh, that is true.
So the hypocrisy angle is there, as if you need a direct conflict of interest to make...
Well, they only like the hypocrisy when it discredits the cause that they oppose. So they love to talk about
but that was
her
the case
taking
here.
private
That was the case here.
No, but they don't. But when the Sun oppose, so the Sun, so if the Sun are like, we hate climate activists and we hate the politics of let's avoid catastrophic climate change, then what they'll focus on is people who said something about challenging climate change and then took a plane. So if they were trying to discredit people who wanted to stop child abuse because they'd done child abuse, they'd be talking about it loads. But I think even the Sun, however low they'll go, they're not sort of like, fighting a huge campaign against the people who want to ban child abuse. So that's a low bar for the Sun, but let's talk.
You totally confused me then, but
okay. Yeah, no, I think I didn't express that in a particularly clear way. Should we talk about Brexit?
I think we should move on.
Let's talk about Brexit.
We've clearly got loads left to say about it.
I've got so much, again.
But we started a bit late. Oh, no, again, you've got something.
No, again, I'm just saying 3 seasons of The Crown, plus being brought up with my mum, my grandma, and my auntie's royal family conspiracy theories regarding the death of Diana. I've got so many opinions about this. And I maintain that having these Diana death conspiracy theories is in itself a form of anti-racist praxis. That'll be my TED Talk when I do one.
Oh, good Lord.
You're watching Novara Media, you're watching Tiski Sour. As you know, this show is only possible because of your kind donations. We are not funded by billionaires, we are not funded by press barons, we are just funded by you, which means that we can talk about the royals in whatever way we please. We don't have to be subservient to the Conservative Party to continue gaining access. We are next going to talk about Brexit, because Anand Menon is in the studio, preeminent expert
we can talk about
on
football
Brexit
instead.
when it comes to... Well, I know jack shit about football, so you and Ash could take a lead on that part. I know more about Brexit than I do about football. It's kind of sad, isn't it? So I suppose let's start with the question of will Brexit be getting done anytime soon? We are due to leave the European Union on the 31st of January. Does that mean Boris Johnson can stand up and say, I promised you I'd do it, I've done it, Brexit is done?
Well, he will say that. And for the short term, at least, it'll look quite good, I think. We'll have 31st of January. Nigel Farage is having a little street party at Parliament Square. Big Ben might or might not bong. That's one of the most surreal news stories I've ever seen. And then I imagine the government, if it is competent, and that's a big if these days, will launch virtually daily a series of domestic policy initiatives through February to give the impression that Brexit was done. Also, bear in mind, I've been very struck by the number of particularly young people who are amazed by what majority government looks like. It's like, oh, wow, the opposition doesn't matter. I mean, this is normal, right, in my lifetime. And I think that gives him an aura of authority as well. So I think, through February and March, my suspicion is that this government is going to look rather good. It's going to look like it's got it done. It's going to be talking about other stuff. It's going to be talking about those red wall seats. We'll have a budget when we can actually start to sort of compare words and deeds. And then, of course, as we get towards March and April, there's going to be a lot of talk about transition and should it be extended. And it'll be a bit of a rude shock, I think, to people that this Brexit that was done is going to drift back towards page one again, particularly as businesses start to have kittens about the danger of leaving with no trade deal at the end of the year.
Do you still think that's a danger then? Because there are sort of Labour politicians, Keir Starmer mentioned it in the interview the other day, he was sort of talking about, we might still have no deal. My take on that, or my advice to the Labour Party would be stop talking about no deal because it sets the bar ridiculously low. And why the hell would Boris Johnson, with a majority, so he just won a stomping majority, his authority is large, whatever happens next is on his head. Why would he now choose a no deal Brexit?
Well, cynically, because in economic terms, the difference between the kind of deal it looks like he's going to get and no deal is relatively small. Now, I mean, you're talking about big numbers still, but actually, our forecasts show that the Boris Johnson deal sort of lies halfway between the Theresa May deal and no deal. So he's only going to get something very thin by the end of the year anyway. And that's, I think, if you flip that round, it's one of the reasons why from the EU side, if Boris Johnson says, look, you need to make concessions to make sure we get a deal, one of their calculations is going to be, well, he wants this and no deal is that. Why should we sacrifice our principles for that slither of a difference? So I think it is perfectly possible we have no deal by the end of the year. The reason why I don't think it's likely is because neither side wants that, partly because of the impact it will have, partly because it will sour relations, and there's an awful lot for us to discuss over the next few years.
And so if it goes to plan, what are we looking at? So I suppose one theory after the general election was the Conservatives, but also, I suppose, both of them. Let's talk about, the strategic imperatives of the Conservatives and the European Union. So one theory when Boris Johnson got his stomping majority was this idea that he's free from the European Research Group, so he can now go and make a pragmatic deal, which will be a bit softer than some of the things that the hard right in his party wanted, because he's going to want to protect the economy so he can get elected in 5 years' time. The other theory is that because he's got such a huge majority, he doesn't have to make any concession to any other party, so he can go for a Brexit, which is just as hard as he's always said he wants. Which of those two do you veer more towards?
I mean, in a sense, your guesses are as good as mine. My sense is there's a kind of omerta on Brexit in the parliamentary party now, and that people will not rebel on that issue. And that includes a number of Conservative MPs, either through ideology, the sort of softer Tories, if you like, who are concerned about what a thin trade deal means, all those Tory MPs in those sort of traditional Labour seats. I mean, Tory MPs in the West Midlands who are being told by the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders that we might not have a car industry in 5 or 6 years' time if we don't get a decent trade deal, are going to have, second thoughts about it. I just don't think they're going to have time to get comfortable enough in Parliament to start talking up against the Prime Minister. My guess is, therefore, he's going to stay with a hard approach.
I mean, my feeling is that we're constantly using political measures and sort of laws of political physics which don't really fit with the new reality that we found ourselves in. So, for instance, Labour went into a general election as though it was fighting a hardline arch-Thatcherite rather than someone who, in the interest of achieving, an historic realignment in British politics, was quite willing to shift on spending commitments, to shift left, to make certain concessions when it came to austerity, to take Sajid Javid, who everyone thought was really going to be a bit of a hawk, would be even harsher than Philip Hammond, to make some quite outlandish for him spending pledges. And so I think that the idea that Boris Johnson's political freedom will be significantly constrained by a perception of how well the economy is doing, and not constrained more so by a political mood, a new culture which is being born, which is sort of jingoistic, which is relentlessly optimistic, which substitutes the normal promises made on growth and increases in standards of living for a compelling narrative about national pride, identity, belonging, and Britain's place in the world. I think that we need to start thinking about how some of those new rules about political culture and selfhood will be the measures by which Johnson is judged to be successful or not.
I'm not convinced that's the game he's going to play. I don't know. Partly because there are still Tories in the parliamentary party who are genuinely One Nation Tories who wouldn't like that. Partly because it's not obvious to me that the electoral strategy for next time is going to be to hang on to those Labour seats rather than to try and woo back the Tories that were lost over Brexit. Because once Brexit's done, those Tories who fled, maybe to Lib Dems, maybe not to vote, what are they going to do? And it's perfectly possible that when we're out of the European Union, they'll come back to the Tory party. What I find bizarre and fascinating in equal measure at the moment is, for both the big political parties, it is absolutely fundamentally unclear to me that they know who they are for anymore. And that's something that that was it was a given, wasn't it? You were for that constituency, you get enough of them out, you win the election with any luck. And you might tweak it at the edges to expand your electoral coalition, but ultimately you knew who your base was. Now neither party knows who its base was. Is the Tory base shifting towards traditional Labour voters? Is the Labour sort of tribe a city's tribe, or do you want to go back to the towns? And the parties have to have internal conversations to decide who they want before they start to formulate policies to attract them. And I'm not sure the Tories have got there yet, and I'm pretty damn certain Labour haven't.
Could you say with the Conservatives that there's sort of two? I haven't really thought out this theory, but there's sort of two options as to where they could go in terms of
go
politics.
Back to the Royals for
and one is
I'm up for it.
one is sort of like the American Republicans, and they go for a sort of like very free market politics, but sort of like white identity cultural politics, which is also fiscally profligate, so they don't mind sort of putting the government into massive debt by sort of peppering money around here and there in targeted places. Or they could go down the sort of Christian Democrat German route, which is you actually have a sort of more inclusive centre-right party, which would involve them being more aligned to the European Union. So could you say there's these two visions of what the Conservatives' politics could be? One of them is a soft Brexit connected to Europe, and one of them is a hard American-style Brexit where they have to go down the cultural white identity politics route.
I'm not sure Brexit is the key issue in this. I think there are politics way beyond Brexit here. And I think you can do a hard Brexit and still go one way or the other. I mean, remember, I think the calculation on the part of the government is borrowing is cheap. And actually, if we just splash money about at these things, this is the big question about this. One of the things that Remain has got wrong, saying all these sort of left behind voters voted Brexit, and as a result, they are going to be poorer. Why? I mean, if you live in Blythe, say, and you'd never had any political attention at all, okay, and you'd seen your local economy crumbling, and all of a sudden now, whether for good motives or bad, a Tory government of all things says, okay, let's splash the cash. Let's reopen some high street shops in Blythe. Let's invest in some infrastructure around there. Actually, that looks quite good. It might not actually mean anything in terms of the medium-term future of your economy, but I think, if this government can show signs of giving a bit of TLC to places they're going to credibly argue Labour forgot about.
I mean, as a protest vote, it was incredibly successful, right? Because what the left like to sort of portray the Brexit vote. Well, I suppose there's two different. The left that want to rescue Brexit say it was about periods of industrial decline, and then the left who hate Brexit say it was about racism. But if you're the one who says we want to rescue it because it was about industrial decline, it's really, in a way, it has worked, right? Because it's saying you can't leave us to manage decline. We need some sort of solution from the government, and now the government aren't paying them attention.
It is staggering how the political lesson on both sides learnt from Brexit has been about the need to address the concerns of the left behind, left out, whatever you want to call them, because the majority of Tory voters, the majority of Leave voters were not those people. And actually, we were talking about this the other day in the office. It's like, it is staggering how little we know about what you might call comfortable leavers think. What are those people in the Tory shires who voted to leave the European Union? Why do they do it? What do they want out of it?
I mean, because then you would have a period of introspection where you don't get to a Leave voter, where you go, oh, actually, that's someone who is quite a lot like my mum, like lives in Broxbourne, goes to M&S at the weekends, fairly comfortable, very good pension.
Well, partly that. I mean, yeah, I think it's partly that. I think on the Remain side, it was good to have a narrative that blamed Brexit on something other than the European Union. So, and I think that was the point of the left. That's why the left behind narrative proved so attractive to people on the Remain side, because you could say they weren't complaining about the European Union, they were complaining about 20 years of bad government. So actually it was nothing to do with membership of that organisation. Whereas actually I think, if you start to look at some of these comfortable leavers, they had issues with the European Union. Whether they were right or not, I don't know, but I've not seen anything that delves into what they were thinking.
From some of the conversations that I've had with very comfortable leavers, I was really struck by one person who I spoke to who said, look, I saw voting Leave as an opportunity to completely reshape how Westminster works and to smash the civil service to bits and make it more efficient and end this sort of endless bureaucratic procedural
Was this comfortable Leaver Dominic Cummings?
It wasn't. It was Benedict Spence.
Oh, okay,
who
yeah.
I spoke to, who is very comfortable indeed.
But is he sort of related to the world of politics?
Yeah.
I mean, that's
he's
what I'm
a pundit,
saying.
right? He might not be representative of...
What I'm saying though is your average comfortable Leave voter who isn't in this world probably isn't thinking about the necessary reform of civil service structure. They might be, I suppose. We just don't know.
I mean, the defence of the focus on the left behind to sort of, put the opposite opinion is that they have now become swing voters, right? So it's the same in America. It's not that all Trump voters are white working class people in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and I always forget the third one. Ohio?
Yeah, could be, yeah.
Yeah.
I was just actually thinking about Canterbury and
Iowa.
Kensington.
Iowa, no, Ohio, whatever, whichever of the three it is, the Rust Belt states. They have now become the key voters in American politics because they are swing voters. Just as in the 1990s and the noughties, you had an obsession with Mondeo Man because they had become the swing voters of that era. So in a way, it's because people want to, other a group of people and blame, Brexit on poor white working class stupid people, in their minds. But also there is a justifiable focus on it because that is the group who, it seems, have determined the last key elections in Britain.
But also, I'm sorry to wang on about culture so much, but it really was something which came up a lot in my interviews with Brexit voters. This is, less comfortable, but, Brexit voters, Keighley, Bradford, Barking, Dagenham, because I was really interested in Brexit voters who are either living in or on the edge of very, very diverse connotations. And so I really wanted to understand what made you vote in the way that you did. One huge racial divide, right? Massive racial divide in terms of what I found. That's not to say that there aren't a significant number of ethnic minority Brexit voters. There are, I just never met any. And two, particularly for older voters, the questions around loss of sovereignty, loss of a shared community experience around work, a story of Britain's national status, and immigration, cultural difference, and race were so bound up with one another. And so I could talk to one person, and I did this actually on a Novara video, the one which shot in Keighley and Bradford, where one woman was talking about, back in the olden times, it would be women in the fields doing the fruit and vegetable picking, and it should be like that again, and that's why you need to get rid of the immigrants, and actually then it would mean that everyone was together and doing something. And so it was also a narrative about, well, we're suffering now, but at least should we suffer in the future after Brexit for a common purpose? There's a point to it.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I still think we're not particularly well informed about. I take your point about marginals, and that's why these voters are now front and centre. But Canterbury and Kensington became swing seats in 2017, which we'd never have expected. So
but there was quite a lot of. There's been attention to sort of young Labour voting millennials, and then older white working class new Conservative voters, right?
Yeah.
Because the whole point of Brexit voters in the Shires have always voted Conservative. They always will, and so they're not politically very interesting if you're interested in the outcome of elections.
And there is an interesting question here, isn't there? Which is, given the sort of demographics which we were talking about while they were fixing the computers at the start. The changing demographics, there is a real question there, which is if these sort of older white people don't tend to vote Labour anyway, and that is where some of these former Labour, what the populations of these former Labour heartlands is increasingly made up of, what do Labour do about that? Do they look elsewhere, or do they come up with a new message?
And again, it's also how the story of the nation is itself racialised. Like I was in Scarborough and doing some door knocking, and door one spoke to a woman who had been really negatively affected by the bedroom tax, and so for the first time she was going to vote Labour, and I was like, oh my god, that's amazing. Next door, knocked on it, and it was someone who had previously voted Labour a lot, and also it's a really, really deprived bit of Scarborough, like really, really deprived. Scarborough as a constituency profile is very, very white, one of the whitest that I'd visited during the election campaign. Knock on the door, guy opens it, very, very friendly, like. He's just like sort of, give me the gesture in the face and is like, I'm not going to vote for Jeremy Corbyn because he's going to let these Muslims and foreigners take over. And I didn't know what else to say other than I am the first Muslim you've seen in like 10 years, bro. Like I've seen the data for this constituency. And so it was how the deprivation that was around him became superseded by a much more abstract narrative about the nation under threat through Muslims and foreigners who don't live in his community.
But there is that real sense of sort of strangers in your own land, isn't there? That actually the two halves are foreign to each other. Both ways round, actually. So this isn't just those people and sort of metropolitan England. It's metropolitan England and those people as well. It is quite staggering how divided we are, and just what an impact that's had on our perceptions of each other.
But then, what happened in particular with Labour, and I think one of the issues with Corbynism is that it was, often appealing to a political collective subjectivity which didn't quite exist anymore. So it was appealing to a set of moral values which come from a trade union movement which has been in decline for decades, one which is assuming that kindness and a desire to revive public services would be successful in mitigating and certainly in England-wide slide to the right on issues of race, culture, and belonging. And its lexicon, lots of the lexicon of Corbynism didn't feel real to people, and I think it was because there was an element of that story that Corbynism was telling, that was based more on the electorate that it would like rather than the one that it had.
Yeah, but I don't think it's true to say that sort of collectivism doesn't exist. I think it does exist. There's a very strong collectivism linked to place in some of these towns, where actually the sense isn't that. I think the sense is very much of politics having failed us, and one of the things that Boris Johnson did quite well was actually appear, for all that it's ridiculous, as an insurgent. And I think that was very, very powerful indeed, that sense that they've all let you down. You can rely on me to do something about it. Now, I think that is still rooted in a great loyalty to place and a great sense of community spirit and a great sense that we just want our area sorted out. Now, I suspect that doing that is going to prove a lot more complicated than the Prime Minister seems to have latched onto as yet. But actually, a lot of faith has been placed in him by these people in these areas, I think.
But I guess I'm talking about the shared collective subjectivity, which is the story of from Hartlepool to Hackney, which is, well, actually, there's lots in common, but that doesn't feel real.
Yeah, no, I agree.
To people in terms of a shared class identity which spans regional, town and urban divides.
Yeah.
Let's move this on to talking about the Labour leadership, because it's all related. We've got less than 10 minutes. So I want to know, I suppose, when it comes to the Labour leadership race, we know that there's now 5 candidates for the leadership. I can't believe I've forgotten them because I've been talking about them all the fucking time.
Keir Starmer,
Rebecca Long-Bailey, Lisa Nandy, Jess Phillips and Emily Thornberry. For the deputy leader, we have Angela Rayner, Ian Murray, Dawn Butler, Rosanna Allen-Khan and Richard Bergen. Clive Lewis had to drop out because he didn't get enough nominations. Emily Thornberry was the surprise entrance to the next round of the leadership race. I suppose what I want to know from you is, how much do you think that we should be thinking about Brexit when Labour Party members vote for the next leader of the Labour Party? So is, for example, Keir Starmer really hobbled by the fact that in these red wall seats no one will vote for someone who they perceive to be a Remainer? Should Lisa Nandy be surging ahead because she, was always sceptical of a people's vote and so potentially could, cut through in those seats which Labour lost at the last election? Or do you think that we should be having the idea, which I suppose is what lots of the Remainers are sort of putting forward, which is to say that in 5 years' time, a different issue is going to be on the top of the political agenda and people will kind of have forgotten or will have deprioritised who did and who didn't back a second referendum that didn't happen anyway 5 years previous?
I mean, I think the answer to that is no. I think people should vote for the candidate that has a credible, persuasive and passionate narrative about what's wrong with this country and how you will fix it. You can say Brexit might be a small part of that. It's not the major part of that. But actually, I have not seen anyone yet who's done that, who mixes the passion with the diagnosis with a clear roadmap to what needs to be done to fix it. And I think that's what I aspire to. Maybe I'm just totally and utterly naive in hoping.
I mean, that's what a good candidate would do, but that's the point of leading an opposition party.
Let's start with thinking about a narrative. And you need to have, what Labour has to have in place in 5 years' time, and you've got to have a bit of help from the government screwing up as well for this to work, is a narrative that both explains why we're going wrong and how you can show that you've been arguing persuasively for a way of doing it differently that people get will help them. Mm-hmm. And you can start doing that now. Actually, I haven't been excessively inspired now. There are bits of this campaign that I've really liked so far, but no one seems as yet to have come up with that.
No one's constructed the whole narrative yet, have they?
Yeah, I've not... and again, it's because we're in the early stages of the campaign. Lots of the campaigns are still getting their teams together. They're still trying to work out what their political strategy is. But beyond either platitudes, which I'm sure are heartfelt, or sometimes quite technical commitments to policy which don't really connect emotionally, I've not seen something substantive in terms of an intervention into reviving the Labour movement, reviving its political culture, and really laying out how we'll defeat a mercurial Boris Johnson Tory government.
But part of that is that this campaign has to be about more than the Labour movement. Obviously, that's crucial to this because you're looking to lead the Labour movement. It needs to be a vision for the country as a whole. So I think a lot of what Lisa Nandy says about towns is very persuasive. But I think if you want to be leader of the Labour Party, you have to have a vision for the country that goes beyond that. which is why I think you need to go beyond leave and remain. I think it needs to be more all-encompassing that. It needs to be, this is my vision for the future, this is how I want to implement it, this will make the country a better place.
But if we're talking about that, isn't then the Slippier banana peel Scotland?
Yeah.
And constitutional arrangements in the future of the Union? Because Brexit isn't the only divide in this country. I also think that as Brexit subsides, there's a meaningful distinction for people. The gulf that it opened up in terms of visions of the future, political and social and cultural values, those things will find a new and ever-changing form. I think they'll still be very meaningful. But in terms of, here is a big question of self-determination, which Labour can't really work out how it wants to respond, and also one about the future of this country in a very fundamental sense, one which I think will only become more salient through the years of a Boris Johnson government, more salient after next year's Scottish parliamentary elections as well.
Possibly. I mean, we don't know. I mean, there's the court case, remember, and a lot can change with that Alex Salmond court case. I mean, I don't know what will happen in Scotland. I think it's far from a foregone conclusion either that they'll have a referendum or that they would vote for independence if they had one, though both are conceivable. But I think Labour have to rebuild, and it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be quick. What is happening for probably the first time in Scotland is that the SNP is being judged on its record in government far more systematically than was the case a couple of years ago. And I think that provides an opening for the Labour Party, because I think you can come up with a progressive unionist case in Scotland, I think, and it might take a lot of hard work simply because of how appallingly Labour behaved in Scotland for so long. But you need to start doing that rebuilding. I think you're absolutely right that you have to start making inroads into Scotland. I don't think it'll be easy, but I think it is probably more conceivable now than it was, ironically, after the last election result. But I think that tendency of judging the SNP on results can be utilised by a canny leader of Labour in Scotland.
Would you not think that, in a strange way, the SNP have proved successful at the very thing that Labour's struggling with in England, which is uniting an electoral coalition which ranges from, deindustrialised, what we would call like heartland constituencies in England, and more urban, more middle class, a bit more diverse centres as well. That the SNP have managed what...
There is no end to the things you can bring about with a subtle dose of nationalism at the heart of your programme. I mean, that, yes, absolutely. And, it provides openings, doesn't it? And if you do what they do and define it as civic nationalism, you can make it acceptable and you can make it sound mainstream. At the end of the day, it's nationalism. They have an advantage in that.
What do you mean by at the end of the day is nationalism? Do you mean that it comes with all the downsides of nationalism? Because I mean, you could look at Scotland and say this is a genuine example of, I think it's a bit of a
are you going to
use but progressive patriotism. You could look at it and say they've actually fair play, they've done it. Might not be possible in England, who knows? But it seems like they have got a fairly harmless version of nationalism. I don't know if you disagree.
Well, I mean, this is to say, oh look, they're far right nationalist party. What I'm saying though is an appeal on the basis of identity is quite a powerful political tool. And it's particularly a powerful political tool when you have things like the Brexit vote, where you can point, or the Tory government here and SNP success there, where you can point to difference. I'm not convinced it'll be easy for them to make the case for separation in a post-Brexit world. And I think the economics of that are going to be problematic at best. But I also think that actually, it's in the SNP's interest to keep the debate focused on independence. It's on Labour in Scotland's interest to talk about public policy. And actually, interestingly enough, in that rather bizarre letter that Boris Johnson wrote back to Nicola Sturgeon, that's what he's saying.
That's what he's focusing on.
Yeah.
We're at 1:15, so I need to let you go in a moment. First of all, how should Labour play Brexit? Should they stop talking about it, or should they be holding Boris Johnson's feet to the fire and saying we still believe in a fairly soft Brexit, and so we're going to vote against everything and protest if you push through a hard Brexit deal?
I think there are two things. I mean, let me preface my remarks by saying it doesn't really matter because he's got a majority in Parliament. I mean, I remember talking to a friend who is in the House of Lords saying that someone had been briefed by one of the ministers on the withdrawal agreement bill and kept raising concerns, to which the answer was 80. i.e. who don't really care what you think anymore. There are limits to what you can do, but you have to build a narrative about alternative Brexit that is credible, because you have to pin the economic fallout of whatever happens this year firmly on this government, and you need to start holding the government's feet to the fire about all the pledges it's made about those traditional Labour seats, and show what is actually going on in these places, and that actually a quick check from the Treasury in parts of the Northwest is not an end to systematic sort of institutionalised inequalities.
Or making up for a car factory closing down
absolutely.
or whatever.
I am endlessly impressed by your ability to focus on political strategy when I'm still in despair. And so I'm still, when you ask me questions, there's this bit of me which is going, my opinions are worthless here. And so, and in terms of like a feat of emotional resilience after defeat, I'm really impressed. Is that weird to say? Maybe it's weird to say.
Well, he hasn't been defeated. He's I'm
an
objective
impartial
political
commentator.
scientist.
I'm at my best when things go against me, I think, in terms... I mean, actually, there's just such an incentive, I think, after the last few years for politics in general, so we don't have to be partisan about this, get its bloody act together and start governing the country and sorting out the myriad problems we confront, all of which have got worse over the last 3 or 4 years while we've been staring at our navels and discussing Brexit.
That's a good note to end on.
I still haven't eaten all day.
Apologies, apologies. And apologies for the late start. We will get our tech sorted by the next show, which should be Aaron Bastani tomorrow. As you've noticed, our shows are a bit all over the place in terms of what day they appear at the moment. After this week, we're going to settle down to a new routine, which is going to be Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I'm going to host one a week. Aaron's going to host one a week.
So this has been a transition period.
Together. This has been a transition period, exactly. I think it went fairly smoothly. I suppose some hiccups at the beginning. In any case, Ash Sarkar, always a pleasure.
Thank you.
And Anand Menon, thank you
see
so
you.
much for coming back on. And thank you for watching Novara Media. As you know, we are a supporter-funded organisation. There are no billionaires that fund us. We don't have to answer to anyone. So please, make this organisation be able to grow, and go to support.novaramedia.com and donate the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month. Also, like this video. It doesn't cost you anything, and there's only 300 of you that have done it, and there's 1,500 of you that are watching it. It's good for our egos, and it also means that more people get stream. Good night.